David Miller had barely been in his new home for a month when the first sign of trouble arrived, a crisp white envelope stuck to his front door, stamped with an official-looking HOA logo. Curious, he tore it open, expecting some routine neighborhood notice. Instead, his eyebrows shot up as he read the contents. Violation notice, unauthorized vehicle parking. Fine, $5,000, payment due immediately. David let out a short laugh, thinking it had to be some kind of joke. Parking in his own driveway. He scanned the legal jargon until he found the specific offense. Vehicles must be parked inside the garage at all times. Driveway parking is strictly prohibited. Leaning against the doorframe, he glanced toward his driveway, where his vintage Mustang sat gleaming under the morning sun. It was his pride and joy, a car he had rebuilt from the ground up. And now, apparently, it was a crime to let it sit outside. His amusement didn't last long. A sharp, deliberate knock at the door made him turn. Standing on his porch, arms crossed and face pulled into a tight-lipped smirk, was a middle-aged woman with a pristine bob cut and an overbearing presence. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of fake politeness that made his skin crawl. "I assume you've read the notice." David kept his tone casual. "Yeah, I just got it. There must be some mistake." "No mistake," she said, her smile widening as if she relished his confusion. "I'm Karen Parker, president of the Homeowners Association. Your vehicle is in violation of HOA regulations." He scoffed. "It's in my driveway." She nodded as if he had just confirmed her point. "Exactly. And per HOA Rule 14b, driveways are not designated parking spaces. All vehicles must be stored in garages to maintain the uniform aesthetic of our community." David raised an eyebrow. "You're saying my car is ruining the aesthetic?" Karen's gaze flickered toward the Mustang with obvious distaste. "We have standards, Mr. Miller. This neighborhood is a place of order. I'd hate to see you start off on the wrong foot." David folded his arms. "So let me get this straight. I park my car in my own driveway, and you fine me $5,000. Her smile never wavered. "It's a deterrent. We take infractions very seriously." His jaw tightened. He had dealt with corporate sharks and ruthless real estate moguls in his career, but there was something uniquely irritating about HOA pettiness. "And if I don't pay?" Karen's eyes gleamed. "Then the fine increases. And should you continue to disregard HOA rules, we have the authority to place a lien on your home." David exhaled sharply through his nose. "For parking in my driveway?" "For breaking the rules," she corrected, her tone sharp. The sheer absurdity of the situation made him want to laugh, but Karen's smug expression killed any trace of humor. He wasn't about to back down just because some power-hungry suburban dictator decided to flex her authority. "Well, that's not happening," he said firmly, crossing his arms. Karen tilted her head as if amused by his resistance. "I do hope you reconsider. This is a lovely neighborhood. It would be a shame if you made things difficult for yourself." She turned on her heel and strode away, her heels clicking against the pavement. David watched her go, his mind already racing with the implications of her threat. He had heard stories about HOAs before, ridiculous fines, overreaching control, neighbors living in fear of stepping out of line. But he had never expected to be at war with one so soon after moving in. His neighbor, an elderly man named Frank, shuffled over from his lawn. "She gets you already?" he asked with a knowing look. David held up the notice. $5,000 for parking in my driveway." Frank sighed. "Yep. She did the same thing to me a few years back. Said my truck was an eyesore." He shook his head. "You got two options, son. Either fight it and get buried in fines or pay up and fall in line." David frowned. "There's no third option?" Frank chuckled without humor. "Not unless you plan on buying the whole damn neighborhood." David let out a dry laugh, but Frank's words stuck with him. By the next morning, the war had officially begun. When David checked his mail the next day, he found another fine. This one is for an unapproved mailbox color. Apparently, the previous homeowner had painted it a slightly off-white shade, which violated HOA regulations. Fine, $500. Then came another notice. His grass was half an inch too long. Fine, $1,000. By the end of the week, he had racked up over $10,000 in fines for the most ridiculous reasons imaginable. Every attempt to challenge them was met with HOA bureaucracy. The appeals process was slow and mysteriously inefficient. Complaints went unanswered. Calls were conveniently misplaced. Karen made a point to parade past his house daily, offering patronizing smiles and sweetly worded reminders that he could avoid all this unpleasantness if he just complied. The final straw came when he walked out one morning and found his Mustang missing. Panicked, he called the tow company listed on a posted HOA sign. Sure enough, they had it. "Yeah, HOA orders," the disinterested operator told him. "Fees $3,000. David was done playing defense. He wasn't going to bend. He wasn't going to cower. If Karen wanted a battle, he would give her a war. The morning after his Mustang was towed, David stormed into the HOA office, a small, overly manicured building near the neighborhood's entrance. The receptionist barely glanced up from her computer as he approached. "I need to speak with Karen Parker," David said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, chewing her gum lazily. "No, but I have $10,000 in ridiculous fines, and I want answers." The receptionist sighed and pressed a button on her phone. "Mrs. Parker, there's a..." She glanced at him. "Mr. Miller here to see you. He seems upset." David didn't have to wait long. Karen emerged from her office moments later, her expression a practiced mask of concern. "David," she said sweetly as if greeting an old friend. "How can I help you today?" You can start by explaining why my car was towed. Karen clasped her hands together. Well, you were repeatedly warned about violating HOA policies. Parking in the driveway is against the rules. Since you failed to comply, we had no choice but to escalate the matter. David gritted his teeth. You mean you had no choice but to steal my car and charge me $3,000 to get it back? Karen laughed lightly as if he had made a silly joke. It's not stealing, Mr. Miller. It's enforcement. David clenched his fists. This was extortion. But if Karen thought he was going to roll over and accept it, she had another thing coming. It was time to fight back. Over the next few days, David and Frank reached out to other homeowners. Some were hesitant to speak up, afraid of retaliation. But as word spread about what happened to David's car and his growing stack of fines, people started listening. At the next secret meeting, held in Frank's garage, a dozen residents showed up. We all know Karen's a tyrant, Frank began. But for years, we've let her get away with it. That ends now. David stepped forward. We can fight this. Legally, we have rights. We just have to know how to use them. A man in his 40s, Paul, crossed his arms. And what if she just keeps hitting us with more fines? David smirked. Then we hit back harder. The rebellion's first move was simple: overwhelm the HOA with paperwork. David, using his experience in real estate, helped every homeowner file formal complaints against the HOA. They contested their fines, demanded financial transparency, and requested records of every dollar the HOA had spent in the past 5 years. Legally, the HOA was required to provide these documents. But Karen, of course, refused. That was her mistake. David took the refusals and sent them to the county housing authority. Within a week, an official audit was scheduled. Karen was furious. And that was just the beginning. Karen didn't take the attack lying down. Within days, homeowners found new violations appearing on their doors. Fine, $2,500. Unauthorized lawn decorations. Fine, $1,000. Trash cans visible from the street. Fine, $3,000. Failure to maintain community aesthetic. The notices flooded in. But this time, people didn't just pay. They fought back. David stood at the center of it all, rallying the neighborhood. This isn't just about fines, he told them. This is about taking our homes back. For the first time in years, people weren't afraid. They were ready to fight. David knew Karen's next move. She would try to make life unbearable for anyone resisting her authority. But he had anticipated this. Before she could escalate further, he met with a lawyer, a sharp-minded woman named Lisa Carter, who specialized in HOA lawsuits. David, this is bigger than just a few fines, Lisa said, flipping through the documents he had gathered. This HOA has been engaging in fraudulent practices for years. We can take them down. David leaned forward. How fast can we do it? Lisa smirked. Fast enough to catch Karen off guard. 2 days later, a lawsuit was officially filed against the HOA, citing fraudulent fines, illegal aliens, and financial mismanagement. Karen was served the papers in the middle of a board meeting. She was livid. This is ridiculous, she snapped, throwing the papers onto the table. We are the HOA. We make the rules. Not anymore, David said, stepping into the room. See you in court. Karen tried everything to delay the trial, but David and Lisa were relentless. As evidence piled up, the cracks in the HOA's foundation began to show. Financial records revealed that Karen had been pocketing money from fines. Emails proved she had deliberately targeted certain homeowners for harassment. The more the judge saw, the worse it got for her. By the time closing arguments rolled around, Karen looked pale and exhausted. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Parker, based on the evidence presented, it is clear that this HOA has been engaged in fraudulent and predatory practices. Effective immediately, all fines imposed under your leadership are null and void. Furthermore, the HOA's finances will be placed under an independent review. Karen gasped. You can't. This case is closed, the judge interrupted. And Ms. Parker, I suggest you find a good lawyer. The homeowners may have their own lawsuit against you personally. David turned to Karen with a victorious smirk. Looks like you're out of business. With the lawsuit won, the HOA was effectively dismantled. Homeowners celebrated as ridiculous fines were refunded, and unfair rules were tossed out. Karen, meanwhile, found herself under investigation. Her bank accounts were frozen, and her once loyal board members turned on her to save themselves. 1 month later, she packed up and left town in disgrace. David stood on his porch, watching his life in the neighborhood return to normal. The once oppressive silence had been replaced with laughter and conversations. Frank walked over, a beer in hand. You did it, kid. David smirked. We did it. Frank raised his beer. To a Karen-free neighborhood. David clinked his bottle against Frank's. To never let another HOA run our lives again. And with that, he sat back, finally at peace in the home he had fought to protect.